So first question I get asked a lot generally is, how do roots perform in Grodan products? And the way I like to answer that is generally, a small block is where we like to utilize that piece of our substrate, like this small block here, for vegetative production and the vegetative phase of the crop cycle. It's a block that is small enough to support a smaller plant, but it has enough volume to where we are able to get really robust rooting and build the structure of the plant very quickly. So when we look at root zone proliferation and colonization, we generally see a faster colonization of the root zone in a small block. And that helps us set up the structure so that we can get to flower very quickly. We generally see a reduced veg time compared to other medias. So that's where you'll see a big advantage of using something like Grodan. You get a nice uniform start and very good plant structure with robust roots.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like one of the main benefits of having the stone wool blocks is the variability in size, like you were saying. In other media like cocoa, a lot of times you'll start in 1 gallon pots and your fresh transplant will be rooting into a large substrate, and it takes a long time for those roots to really establish. But with these Grodan blocks, you can transplant into a smaller substrate and work your way up to larger substrates with minimal labor and really drive that root development.
Yeah, and something I really, really like about that small block is dry back intervals. You're always going to get a faster dry back in a smaller container. So that's where we get more root development faster. And it's really nice being able to see us go from a block that size into a slab or onto a unislab and really get to blow it out within not even 2 weeks.
Yeah,
so
for sure. Yeah. I also think there's something to be said about root health in these blocks too. Other substrate types tend to retain a lot more moisture, whereas these have a lot better drainage, and the Grodan blocks really help prevent overwatering and overwatering related problems like Pythium and Fusarium. So I like that about them a lot too.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the bigger differences we see between medias like stone wool and cocoa is that cocoa has a buffer, so it takes a little bit longer for those nutrients to be available in terms of generative steering.
Right.
So when it comes to stone wool, we're actually able to move to more generative steering a lot quicker. So that's a big advantage there. It doesn't take quite as much time. And, with this industry and where we're at right now, we're trying to be more efficient. We're trying to reduce time and, really save money for our cost of goods sold.
Yeah, 100%. For sure. Efficiency is a big one. I had a client submit an email the other day, and they were interested in shifting to stone wool Grodan, and they were wanting to know, obviously there's a lot of upfront labor and, just work that goes into that whole transition. And they were asking, is it really worth it? Is it worth the upfront cost and work and all of that good stuff? And so I wanted to dialogue about that. What do you guys think?
So one thing I would say is, you could work with an account manager at Grodan, but I worked on a project to help derive more value for what we're doing with the product. So it goes beyond just looking at the first line item, which is usually a quick thing to cut in, when you're operating, is to go through and say, hey, this media costs this amount. We can immediately cut this and we can save costs very quickly. Mm-hmm. But what we don't always think about is what are the downstream effects of cutting costs, or switching medias. And when it comes to stone wool, I see a lot of value in, labor efficiency being 100%. One. In addition to that, water and fertilizer optimization. And then when I looked at it too, I took this value calculator, and it comes from a financial modeling tool. So something you would see in a normal business model, to describe what we're going to do in terms of cost of goods sold. And when I started calculating these differences, I was really surprised to find that even if I could increase our yield by about 1%, which is pretty small if you're looking at it on a large scale, and say you're yielding around 70 grams a square foot, if we can yield 1% more to 2% more, we're talking about, a gram plus or minus per square foot, which is fairly small. And when we look at that, and we look at it over the size of a large canopy and how much more revenue that brings in, it kind of opened my eyes up a little bit more to really looking at those numbers and really understanding what we were doing. Mm-hmm. And I found that by having a small increase in yield, it was able to cover the entire cost of the substrate. So that gives me a chance to go in, and if I'm talking to a cultivator, we can explain that to them a little bit more clearly. Or if we're talking to an executive team, or somebody that's a decision maker, having that financial modeling tool and actually being able to show them numbers is extremely valuable and a good way to paint the picture to show, there is more value than just what we're seeing on the front line.
Yeah.
That's substantial too. Only like a 1% increase ends up covering the entire cost of that transition. That's a big deal. I think one of my favorite things about Grodan as opposed to other media types like cocoa and soil is really the cleanliness of it. It's so much cleaner for obvious reasons. You don't have cocoa and soil getting everywhere, but it also is allows for more precise irrigation, which I appreciate about it too, and it cuts back on labor by so much.
Yeah, the labor is a huge
I
thing.
think that might be the biggest cost savings there is the amount, because when you're doing, say you're watering in some cocoa bags, you got to flush the media, and then you got to fill all the bags, and it's a painstaking process, and every grower who's done it knows it's a pain. So having a transplant that is streamlined as literally watering up your blocks and popping a plug right in, it makes it so easy.
No, a big
and kind
thing
of foolproof.
Yeah, a big thing with that, in the past growing in cocoa, I'd spend a whole day doing a 300 plant transplant, filling pots. There's cocoa all over the ground. It takes a long time, but like even at Endless, we'll load up a full room 20, 30 minutes and it looks beautiful. It's clean. The tables stay clean. I feel like even with collecting runoff samples and stuff, like you get a more accurate sample because of the fact that you don't have so much gunk on the tables. You know what I mean? So that's a big thing with it as well. And I really do love that side of things, but also like using the substrate sensors that we get to use and getting those precise irrigations. It's just so nice to see, like, going back to the root mass, like how fast we'll develop that root zone, and the growth is unparalleled compared to a lot of other substrates and media types. So yeah, it's a really cool thing to get to experience.
Yeah, I would agree too. Another topic on the cleanliness aspect, I think we've all encountered situations where we've bought cocoa bags or soil that there's spores of mushrooms in them, or some kind of fungi, or just...
Or they're completely saturated with moisture.
Yeah, some kind of contaminant, and that's not something you ever have to worry about with Grodan, which I really appreciate.
I was going to say, does your veg team thank you for not having to like prep cocoa pots and blocks? And
I'm sure.
about that, because that's something I always think about when I've been in the garden operating before.
Yeah.
Thinking about ergonomics, we work in a lot of bedrooms that are tiered. So if you're working on that bottom tier or even on the top tier on a ladder, it's not the most ergonomic position to be in. So when I'm going to transplant, it's a lot easier for me just to drop a clone, plug my emitters in, and be off to the races.
Right.
And when you have a happy team that's not in pain and their backs are hurting, I think you get a little bit more productivity out of them too. And I think that goes a long way in a garden because, it's even though the work isn't considered extreme manual labor, it can still become, quite a large task. And it's sometimes monotonous work that takes a while. You need a lot of people that are still passionate about it and want to keep them focused, want to keep them, from their backs hurting and things like that. So
and you can focus more on the plants themselves, because you're not spending so much time with all the other things. As far as like takedowns too, like it's never been easier to take down a room and get it cleaned out. You know what I mean? So I really like that as well about it. I wonder what you guys were thinking about, like, what would you tell a grower that's trying to make a switch from cocoa to rock wool? What would be the first bit of advice you'd give them?
For sure. I think for me, I would tell someone to invest in some kind of substrate sensor.
For sure.
Grodan is great because it allows you to do extremely precise irrigation, but it is a little less forgiving in the terms of dryback because it doesn't hold quite as much moisture as the other substrates do. So I think investing in a good substrate sensor is probably one of the first things you should do. There is a bit of a learning curve when growing with stone wool.
100%. I completely agree with that. And also, like, just because you're in a new media doesn't mean that you don't do a lot of the fundamental things that you would do with other media types. Like, we're constantly every day I'm picking up slabs, making sure that they're at field capacity, pulling back the plastic a little bit, looking at how they're rooting. And there's a lot of small things that go into it that a lot of people, I feel like, would overlook because it's a different media type. And I just feel like when you get it and you nail those drybacks and you really get, I'd say a few runs, but you get in there and you really can see like, okay, this works or this doesn't work. Dried back too hard this time. I got to keep my moisture content level higher. You know what I mean? So it's just, it takes time, like you said, but once you get there, you get there.
For sure. I do feel like once you do get it dialed, it's smooth sailing.
Yeah.
It's almost automatic.
Yeah, I think there is more challenges, but there's also more reward. Use the system, and I would say, use the Grodan crop advisors, or people like yourself, where you guys provide plenty of education to people in the area. Right. But be willing to listen to people that have used the product, so that you really do understand the fundamentals. Because even if you are doing a trial, you don't want to have any crop loss. So really understanding the foundation for how Stonewall actually operates and how to irrigate that correctly. One of the biggest things I think of is the rooting in strategy, which I think you mentioned. I think with cocoa, a lot of people are used to allowing it to dry back and then starting to irrigate, 5 to 6, 7 days later. Yeah. Where with Grodan, we recommend these daily irrigations. And I think those fundamentals are slightly different because, like you said, cocoa is much more forgiving. So in terms of dry back, it's a lot easier to re-wet the media. But if we over dry in Grodan, we get hydrophobic spots in the media. It can lead to undesirable results. You get the salt to remineralize back into the solution, the salt that has gotten stuck in the hydrophobic areas. Right. And then that could lead to different physiological responses in the plant or different morphological responses as well, stuff that's a little bit less desirable. So I would say really use the knowledge that's out there. We've got grow guides. Like I said, Endless does plenty of education sessions, and then Grodan has plenty of support to get somebody started on a trial or to really make them feel comfortable and understand the fundamentals of what we're trying to do with Stonewall.
Definitely. Do your research ahead of time.
Absolutely.
And utilize those resources.
Absolutely.
For sure. Well, Jon, we really appreciate you joining us today for this conversation.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you.
I feel like we covered some awesome topics.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be talking more. But yeah, stoked to see what you guys are doing. I haven't been to the facility a little over a year, but I've heard nothing but good things. And I think the team is doing a great job.